podcast, actually, I believe Patrick is the creator of PBD Podcast. He was recently on Piers Morgan's show to basically advocate against the U.S. giving these dollars to more foreign wars, etc. And I was with him for part of this conversation. Then all of a sudden it took a different turn. And Piers Morgan actually, I think he got him on something. And we can't ignore this, guys. Let's go ahead and get started here.
We're encouraging them to get Ukraine to come into NATO sooner, and then Article 5 can be activated. You're indirectly. It's going to be Iran, it's going to be Muslim, it's going to be Islam. If you're talking Zelensky, it's going to be Ukraine. Everybody has their own individual motives. I'm not here to change your motive. I'm here to look at the moves we're making. Is it healthy to lower the temperature or increase it? If us funding NATO and we're encouraging them to get Ukraine to come into NATO sooner, and then Article 5 can be activated, you're indirectly causing a World War III with Russia. You don't have to do that. And you made a promise to Russia for many, many years. We are not going to have NATO recruit Ukraine, and now you're open to the idea. You're just poking the bear. So what do you think he's going to be doing? You're not.
We've made promises to a lot of people. We've made promises to a lot of countries. It's true. Like, it's just, so he's bringing up the fact that, yes, our government, most of our politicians will call out Russia for invading Ukraine, but they'll leave out the fact that Russia was provoked, right? And they were provoked by NATO.
Dealing with a lightweight guy that's just going to sit there and say, okay, NATO, okay, America, you are the ruler, you're the king, I'll listen to you. We're not even oblivious to think we're not instigating, we're not poking. Now, let's go to Zelensky. What's Zelensky's fear right now? I don't know if you saw what Zelensky did about 4 weeks ago. Again, strategic move. He fears Trump's going to get elected. So what does he do? He goes and tries to negotiate $100 billion amount of financing that he can get no matter who gets elected to president. What a brilliant move for him to make, that regardless of who becomes president, the U.S. government should still give him $100 billion if this war continues. Well, guess what? In insurance business, that's called an irrevocable life insurance trust, which means when you get married to a wife and you buy her a life insurance policy and she says, I want you to give me a $10 million insurance policy that even if you get a new wife or a new girlfriend, you can never change the beneficiary on that. And you do that for the wife to know that you're going to take care of me. Okay, no problem. It's called an ILET. This is your $5 million, your $10 million. Zelensky got an ILET of $100 billion, give and take. Credit to him. I think America's a little bit naive for allowing this beggar, the greatest fundraiser of all time, to keep asking money from us. And here we are in the state of California and America. You've been to California, you got a place in California. They can't track $24 billion of money that they raise from taxpayers to fix the homelessness problem. Their accountants like, we don't know where the money went. And all we needed was $5 to $20 billion to build a border. America has zero credibility to send all this money they're sending to Ukraine while we are in shambles right now here in America. They have no moral authority to be so concerned about other countries and not America themselves.
But let me pause here for a second, because I totally hear where he's coming from. But here's the piece that's missing from this conversation. Why is that, though, Patrick? Because what's not being called out is the fact that the politicians are bought and paid for, that a lot of the politicians are corrupt, that the moment that they became a congressman or a senator, they basically decided to sell their soul to the Israeli lobby, the military industrial complex, and Wall Street. Now, that's the piece that I think is important to bring to this conversation. And oftentimes when I see people have these discussions on Piers Morgan's show, they don't bring up that part. They don't mention corruption. They don't mention the money. They're not following the money trail. They leave that piece out. And I think, I think these people are intelligent enough to know that that's how it works. I don't think that Patrick isn't aware of this. I think he's very much aware. So why do they leave that out? Hold on to that question and you'll find out why.
It's frustration many Americans are going through right now.
But my response to that would be America has plenty money to deal with more than one thing at one time. There's no reason actually why there wasn't a concerted joint political will. And that's why I find this impasse in Congress so depressing. If they just came together and thought, actually, there are various things going on here which need America's help. One is on our own border. which is clearly an existential threat to safety of people who live anywhere near it. And we need to fix that. We need to help Israel from this attack from Iran and the fallout from that, which is obviously what America's already done. But we should commit more to helping Israel, which is America's great ally. And they should also be able to say, actually, regardless of the build-up, and I hear your argument about NATO encroachment and so on, which is the kind of thing Putin would say. That's his justification. He has said that. But ultimately, Vladimir Putin, 2 years ago, invaded a sovereign democratic European country and has murdered a lot of people. And he wants to take that land. And I just cannot believe I'm living in an era where particularly a number of people on the conservative right in America seem quite relaxed about that and seem almost to want to find excuses for Putin. Yeah, well, we kind of pushed him. I'm not saying everything you just said, but because I
pause here, Piers, for just a second. No, it's not that we kind of pushed him. NATO did push this. There was a coup. There's a whole timeline for this. There's no you don't kind of push someone into war. This is something that Russia has explained multiple times, is that for years they sat by while these things were happening. They wanted this to happen. NATO wanted this to happen. We go back to the Nord Stream pipeline. We go back to the bridge. And I said it back then. Are people really sitting back and believing that Russia would just blow up their own pipeline? That didn't make any sense. But people did. People believing that Russia blew up their own bridge too. And it wasn't until that article came out from Seymour Hersh that people realized, oh, snap, looks like it wasn't Russia at all. Think about it. Why would they do that?
hear that argument. And historically, clearly, there was a fear by the Russians that NATO were trying to spread their wings a bit and bring in Ukraine and so on. I get that. But I don't think any of that justifies a brutal invasion of a sovereign democratic country. And I think if Putin's allowed to win here, then he will inevitably go after other countries. He'll want to expand his power base, and he will think that actually America blinked and that actually the West blinked.
That's a NATO talking point, and that's also a CIA talking point. We have never, ever, ever heard Vladimir Putin say that he wants to go after other countries in Europe. This is a statement that has been perpetuated by mainstream media, by the CIA, and by the US government. I mean, let's be real here. We have never heard him say that. These are just statements that the US government is making up, that the State Department has made up. They don't have any proof of that. And then whatever the narrative is that comes from the State Department, you have to remember that mainstream media repeats the narrative that comes from the State Department. It's not like the people on CNN and MSNBC are out writing out their scripts or anything like that. They're looking at a teleprompter and they're just reading things that were already written for them. So it's for Piers to sit there and repeat those same talking points. It just, whose control is he under?
And I don't think that's what we should be doing with a Russian dictator. Back to you.
Let me ask you a question, Piers. So I'll give you, you said something earlier, you said, with all the money America has, if you make $27,000 a year and you have $34,000 in credit card debt, okay? You have $27,000 in income. You have $34,000 of credit card debt. You think it's a good idea for you to go buy a $20,000 car? You think it's a good idea for you to go buy another watch? You think it's a good idea for you to go out there and keep investing into other people? Let's change the numbers so it's a little bit more real. Let's say you're making $270 grand a year. You have $340,000 in debt, and you have a wife and 3 kids. You're trying to send your kids to private school. You live in a community that there's a lot of shooting going on. You're living in a community that 2 kids down the street got shot. Your wife's asked you to put a camera set up around the house, maybe put up a fence because, robbery, they're coming and breaking into the house. Do you think your priority should be to fix the fence, fix the gate, put the camera, or go and fix someone's problem that's 2,000 miles away from you? What do you think?
So what was interesting about this example that he gave, where he said that we're going to use something that's a little bit more real, or a little bit more relatable, I think most people listening to that can't relate to what he just said. He started off with the conversation with, let's say you're making $270,000 a year. How many of you are making $270,000 a year? You know, this just goes to show you the amount of they're out of touch. They're so out of touch. Most people watching the show are not making $270,000 a year. Most people I know are not making $270,000 a year. Then he goes on to say, you got your kids in private school. How many of you got kids in private school? How many of you can afford to pay for private school? This is just, it's something a little bit more real in his world, in the world that him and Piers live in. So that tells you where Patrick is coming from. Patrick is not living in the same world that we're living in.
It is.
So my answer to that would be, it entirely depends on how you view the overall threat from Russia to the West. It entirely depends on whether you believe Vladimir Putin, that he simply wants to take a section of Ukraine because they're Russian speaking and they always wanted to be part of Russia. Whether you believe all this stuff, which I think is bullshit, frankly, and it's the kind of stuff that dictators say when they want to get away with what they're getting away with. And I think that America's national interest is not served by an aggressive Russian dictator winning wars in Europe. It's actually the antithesis of the national interest of America being served. It cannot be good for America if Russia starts to expand through Europe. That would be my argument.
Is also assuming Putin. But your position is also, your argument would also be, to be respectfully, your argument is you're putting Putin in the category of a Hitler, is what you're saying. You're saying he is the next this, and because if he goes after Ukraine, then he's going to go after Poland, and then he's going to go after this, and then he's going to try to take over Europe. And are you kidding me? Like, you know what it would take to want to go after EU or NATO or US or all these other guys? They don't want to do that. You think that's what they want to do? You think Russia's trying to go after that kind of a... They're not trying to do that. This is a guy that has pride on what happened with his country. And by the way, everything that I just said to you at the beginning, the $27,000 to $270,000 in income and $340,000 in debt, the U.S. GDP is $27 trillion, but we're $34 trillion in debt and climate. And you want me to sit here while we got 10 million illegal immigrants just crossed the border? You want me to worry about a war between Russia and Ukraine and say, send another $100 million?
No, I want you to worry about both things. I want you to worry about both.
Let me pause here for a second. So one thing I want to point out what he said here, he brought up the GDP. I want people to stop talking about the GDP. Okay? Stop talking about the GDP. The GDP doesn't reflect what working class people are experiencing when they look at their bank accounts. The GDP doesn't reflect the grocery prices at the supermarket. I know you guys keep saying, Sabby, you keep bringing up the grocery prices. That's because I go there once a week and I see it, right? The GDP, when we're talking about the gas prices, we're talking about the grocery prices. When we're talking about what people are having to pay for, the money that is coming out of their bank account, who gives a fuck about the GDP? When you're poor, it doesn't matter if the GDP is doing well. This is the world that Patrick lives in. He lives in a different world. When you're poor, when you're working class, when you're struggling to pay rent and your landlord increases the rent and you were already struggling to pay what was there, but it's the cheapest place that you can afford where you live, you're not thinking about GDP. It doesn't matter if the GDP is doing well. So going forward, when we talk about economics, particularly in this climate, we are not going to focus on GDP. We're going to focus on wages, the cost of living, and we're going to focus on that out of reach report that we've gone over on the show multiple times. The new one will be out in July 2024. That's what we're going to focus on, not the GDP.
By the way,
No,
if you're running America,
but
hang
that's
on,
not how
Patrick.
it works, though.
Patrick,
Piers,
if you're running,
that's not how it works.
But if you're the
president,
well, actually, if you're the president of the United States, you have to deal with a number of things at once. You have to fix the broken bridges. You have to fix education. You have to deal with rising crime.
Problem.
You have to deal with the
No
southern
problem.
border.
I agree.
But you cannot.
I agree.
But you cannot avoid if you're still the number
Piers,
one. Well, hang on. Let me finish my point. If you have aspirations to maintain your position as the number one superpower in the world.
Sure.
With that comes a responsibility, doesn't it, to safeguard democracy and freedom, doesn't it?
Why do we have to be the number one superpower in the world? Why are we trying to maintain that? That is part of the problem. This idea that no other country can be competitive with the United States economically, and Russia is, and so is China. And that's one of the reasons why the US continues to paint them as this big bad enemy. What's the homeless population in Russia? What's the homeless population in China? Maybe we need to focus on taking care of our own people and cleaning up our own mess before we're looking at what these other countries are doing.
Lead with strength. We are weak today because of our border. It's called sequencing. Everything is about thinking like a grandmaster. When you play chess with Tate. You're a chess guy. It's about your next 5, 10, 15 moves. They say amateurs. I'm an amateur chess player. I play with my son every night at 10 o'clock. Neither one of us are professional chess players. I probably know my next 3 to 5 moves, okay? Professionals, maybe 5 to 10 moves. Grandmasters, 10 to 15 moves. America is supposed to be a grandmaster. Your number one move should be protect your border, not Ukraine. If you're saying let's worry about Ukraine, maybe it's number 9 on the list. It ain't number 1 above the border. That is the most ludicrous argument I would ever make.
Well, let me ask you this.
We have to take care of America
let me ask you this.
Then we take care of everybody else.
Why should America be supporting Israel then? That's thousands of miles away.
And this, ladies and gentlemen, was the mic drop moment. Piers threw this back up in his face. So since we should not support the war in Ukraine, we should not be supporting Ukraine. Why are we supporting Israel? Now, I am not hypocritical on this issue because I don't support giving money to Ukraine and I don't support giving money to Israel. But how does Patrick feel about this when the country changes to Israel? Listen to this.
How much money are we giving to Israel?
Billions.
How much money are we giving Israel? I'm curious. Go ahead. I'm curious. Go ahead. Are we sending troops over there? Are we sending missiles over there?
No, but
how much money are we giving to Israel? I know the dome we've given it since 1945. America has $10 billion. We've given to them $3 billion is towards the dome.
Yeah.
How much money are we giving them?
So this part right here was very telling. We give Israel $3.8 billion a year. They have universal health care in Israel, free public colleges in Israel. While people here are taking out student loans, they can go to college in Israel for free. While you're struggling to pay for a medical bill, or you just delivered a baby and you're trying to figure out how you're going to pay that high ass bill from the hospital, remember, they have universal health care in Israel. So it's interesting to me the number of discussions that he has had on PDP podcasts about Israel and Gaza. And all of a sudden, he seems to be unaware of how much money the U.S. government is giving Israel every year and other ways that the U.S. government has been taking care of Israel. Either he does know and he's playing coy, or he does not know, and that in itself is really problematic.
Billions of dollars.
Not comparable to what we've given to Ukraine in 12 months, 24 months. No way. Not even close.
Isn't the principle the same? You're doing it to help them defend themselves.
Piers knew this was going to be a moment. Isn't the principle the same?
No, it's not. The part with Israel is slightly different because it's both strategic, because there's only one country in Israel that has historically always been pro-America and has been an ally in the Middle East, and that's Israel. Iran's not been the case since the Shah, right? Saudi Arabia now with MBS, he's trying to work and make progress.
So he exposed himself here, right? He says, well, no, it's not the same. No, it is the same. Either you support money going to fund these wars abroad or you don't. And this is the thing with people like Patrick and Marjorie Taylor Greene and Tulsi Gabbard and RFK Jr. They expose themselves when the country changed from Ukraine to Israel. Patrick knows what's up. 9 times out of 10, I'm willing to bet that Patrick is already knew, wait a minute, can't go there. I'm not going to criticize Israel. He knows what's up. Somebody, let's pull up some receipts. Who is funding PDP podcast? And maybe it is just Patrick. Maybe he invested in it himself. I don't know. Are there any donors connected to PDP podcast? And who are those donors? So he's trying to find a way to get himself out of this situation because Piers Morgan actually just exposed Patrick.
To the point where Ronaldo, your friend, feels safe going out there with his family to play soccer there. These are good things that MBS and Saudi Arabia is doing. He's kind of doing what the Shah was doing back in the 50s, 60s, 70s. I like what he's doing with Saudi Arabia. But Israel, to us, a part of it is also loyalty due to our faith, where we need that country, especially what America was founded on, Judeo-Christian. That's a...
Pause. So now he's using the faith excuse. So that tells me that Zionists have already gotten to Patrick. Because the United States has separation of church and state. Now we're supposed to back Israel because of the faith component. How many of you watching practice Jewish faith? How many of you watching practice Christianity? How many of you watching are Buddhists? How many of you watching don't practice any type of religion at all? What is he talking about? Now all of a sudden we're supposed to support Israel because of a shared faith? Let's continue.
A little bit deeper than that. But with Ukraine, the guy's an opportunistic guy. Respect to him that's coming up to America, making everybody feel guilty and raising money. I salute him for being a great beggar and a great fundraiser. But Ukraine is not more important than the U.S. border.
What if, let me paint the scenario. What if Trump wins the election and he says he'd fix the Ukraine war in one day, which presumably he's already hinted would mean just giving Putin the land that he's taken, and say he does that, and say that you're wrong about Putin. Say that it turns out he does have imperialistic ambitions beyond what people think he has, and that emboldened by America's retreat, not just there, but also Afghanistan and so on. He's watched how America's conducted itself on the foreign stage. Let's say he then does attack somewhere like Poland, which is a NATO country. What then?
Piers.
Let's pause here for just a second. Brock said, I had respect for PDB, not anymore. I mean, I think the thing for me that was, and I don't agree with everything that PBD, I always get this mixed up, says on that platform. I don't always agree with what they say on their show, but one thing I notice is that they give voices to different people. Like, so they don't always bring on people that agree with them, which I think that's a good thing to do, to hear different voices. But I really do feel like Piers Morgan did expose Patrick here because no, it's not about a vested interest. He says that Zelensky is an opportunist, right? Well, so is Benjamin Netanyahu. He's talking about, well, he's asking for money. So is Benjamin Netanyahu. But see, Patrick knows not to criticize Israel. That is why he changed his tune just like that. So you're either against funding these wars abroad or you're for it. There is no in between, or it depends on the country when it comes to me. A lot of these people have been exposed. A lot of them. We'll finish up with what he says here about what if Trump wins the presidency.
You are smarter than this. You've been around, you've interviewed a lot of people. You know this world better than I do. You've talked to Trump many, many times. You have a relationship with him. It's actually a very entertaining relationship that's up and down. And then you go to Charlemagne the God and you defend him in a different way. I love your relationship with him. It's very fascinating, truly. But Piers, you know Putin's not going to do shit to Poland if Trump's the president, because when an alpha and an alpha get in a room and they negotiate, there's a fair level of respect and admiration for each other. We can look at case study. The great thing about what I love the 2024 elections for is the following. Here's why I love the case study of what we have today. I think it's going to be used for decades, if not centuries to come. And here's what the case study is. We can now officially, Piers, say we had 4 years of Trump administration, okay, to look at, and we have almost 4 years of Biden to look at. We can compare economy to economy, peace to peace, wars to wars, unemployment to unemployment. We can look at every single thing. And there is zero proof from those who are skeptical on your end, worried about the fact that Putin's going to attack Poland, that Trump would allow something like that to happen, because it never happened under his regime during the 4 years that was there. We feared ISIS. When's the last time you used the word ISIS? We feared, this guy went after Qasem Soleimani, who was supposed to be the number 2, number 3 guy in the world in Iran, and potentially was going to run Iran. And he was a leader of all these guys behind closed doors, all these proxy wars. You killed that guy? That's kind of like in the mob family. You think about back in the days, you go and you kill Ben Siegel. You go kill, you know, the main guys. That you don't do something like that. He did. That's what Trump did. Audacity, risk at the highest level. You went after a guy like that? I did. Everyone in the marketplace says, okay, guess what? You ever seen the movie American Gangster?
Yeah.
And we're going to stop here because he goes off into a tangent, but it's obvious that Patrick hasn't been paying attention as much to foreign policy when he says, when's the last time you heard someone mention ISIS? Actually, that was rather recently when we talk about the attack that happened in Moscow at that theater. They blamed it on ISIS. They said that ISIS were the ones that were taking the credit for it. So I don't know what's going on with Patrick, but I will tell you this much. This has been a mask off moment for a lot of the people who said we should not be giving our money to Ukraine, but they're totally fine with us giving our money to Israel. When he says it has to deal with common interests, or we have shared interests when it comes to Israel, well, Ukraine seems to think that they have shared interests with the United States because they've asked to join NATO. So there are a lot of countries that may have shared interests with the United States. That doesn't mean we should be funding their wars and sending them weapons abroad. So all of a sudden, when it comes to Israel, all that stuff he said about the border, all of a sudden, when it comes to Israel, oh, no, don't worry about that. Don't worry about the border now. We go ahead and take care of Israel because we have shared interests. See how that goes? A lot of these people have been exposed. A lot of these people have been exposed. A lot of these people are afraid of the Zionists and what's going on. But you have to be consistent on this issue. And I am one of the people that I am looking for that. If I see that you are not being consistent on this issue, where if the country changes, all of a sudden you're totally fine with that foreign spending, you know, that's a problem for me. That's a problem for me.